In 2023, something extraordinary happened in Iceland that barely made headlines. Over 2,500 workers switched to a 4-day work week, not as an experiment anymore, as their new reality. When researchers followed up, they found something that challenges everything we've been told about productivity. People worked fewer hours, and companies performed better. Not slightly better. Measurably, documentably, undeniably better. And here's what should make you pause. 92% of companies that tested shorter work weeks around the world decided to keep them permanently. Not because they're generous, because the numbers work. Before we start, a quick roll call. Write in the comments which part of this planet you're watching from, and then just listen and enjoy. So here's the question that keeps economists, business leaders, and futurists awake at night. If the 40-hour work week is dying, what invisible forces are killing it? And more importantly, why is almost nobody talking about the fact that this transformation is already underway? By the end of this series, you'll understand why the year 2040 won't just see fewer people working 40-hour weeks. You'll see why that model will seem as outdated as factory bells and punch cards seem to us now. But we're not going to predict this future. We're going to watch it emerge from patterns already visible today. Let's start with what's actually happening right now, while most of the world isn't paying attention. In 2019, Microsoft Japan did something bold. They gave all 2,300 employees every Friday off for an entire summer. Not unlimited vacation, not flexible hours, just a simple deal. 4 days of work, 3 days of rest, same pay. When the results came in, executives had to double-check the numbers. Productivity didn't drop. It jumped 40%. 40%. In the same 3 months, electricity costs fell by 23%, and employees printed 46% fewer pages. The company became more efficient simply by asking people to work less. Across the world in Dubai, 50 companies participated in a trial where employees worked 4.5 days instead of 5. When researchers surveyed participants afterward, 98% reported satisfaction with the change. Not tolerance, satisfaction. Companies reported higher productivity, better employee well-being, and most tellingly, they chose to continue the model after the trial ended. But perhaps the most significant evidence comes from the United Kingdom's 4-day week pilot, the largest trial of its kind, involving 61 companies and nearly 3,000 workers across multiple industries. The results, published in 2023, revealed something profound about human work capacity. Company revenues rose by an average of 1.4% during the trial period. At the same time, sick days dropped by 65%, and staff turnover fell by 57%. This wasn't a fluke. This was a pattern. And the workers themselves? 39% reported lower stress levels. 71% experienced reduced burnout. Sleep improved. Anxiety decreased. Mental and physical health scores rose across almost every measured category. The trial asked a simple question: what happens when people have time to be human? The answer reshaped how economists think about productivity. Now, you might be thinking this works for tech companies or creative industries, but what about the real world? What about manufacturing, healthcare, retail? Fair question. The UK trial included all of those. A fish and chip shop participated. So did a housing association, a skincare company, an animation studio, a recruitment firm. The diversity of industries matters because it proves this isn't about what you do. It's about how we've been measuring human output all along. Here's what most people miss about the 40-hour work week. It was never based on science. It was a compromise. In the 1920s, Henry Ford reduced his factories from 6-day weeks to 5, not because research showed it was optimal, but because he noticed well-rested workers made fewer mistakes and bought more cars. That's it. That's the scientific basis for a system that's governed human life for a century. One car manufacturer's hunch, which happened to be correct enough to become standard. But now we have actual data. Thousands of data points from trials across continents, cultures, and industries. And that data tells us something remarkable. Human productivity doesn't scale linearly with hours worked. We've known this intellectually for decades, but we've been too afraid to restructure society around it. That fear is eroding. In 2025, something shifted in the global conversation about work. It wasn't sudden. It was accumulative. Portugal ran trials. Spain tested shorter weeks in specific regions. Belgium gave workers the legal right to request a 4-day schedule. Scotland launched a pilot program. New Zealand companies reported success. Australia began exploring options. These weren't isolated experiments anymore. They were the leading edge of a structural change in how developed economies think about labor. And here's the part that should really catch your attention. The workers who experience shorter weeks don't want to go back. In the UK trial, at the end of the pilot period, 15% of participants said no amount of money would convince them to return to a 5-day schedule. Think about that. 15% would rather quit than lose that extra day. These aren't lazy people. These are individuals who discovered that time is worth more than incremental pay increases. That realization is contagious. But this revolution isn't being driven by workers alone. Companies are discovering that attracting talent in 2025 requires more than good salaries. 83% of workers now say work-life balance is more important than pay when evaluating jobs. For younger workers, that number climbs even higher. The 4-day week isn't a perk anymore. It's becoming a competitive necessity. Companies that offer it are finding it easier to recruit. Companies that don't are struggling to explain why. The economic logic is becoming undeniable. When employees work fewer hours, they take fewer sick days, which means less disruption and lower healthcare costs. They stay with companies longer, which means less money spent on recruitment and training. They make fewer mistakes, which means less waste and rework. They report higher job satisfaction, which correlates directly with better customer service and innovation. Every metric that matters to a business improves when people have time to rest. And yet, resistance remains. Old frameworks die slowly. There are executives who still believe presence equals productivity, who measure commitment by hours in the office rather than outcomes achieved. There are entire industries built on the assumption that more hours mean more value. But those assumptions are crumbling under the weight of evidence. What we're witnessing isn't just a trend. It's the early stage of a fundamental reordering of human work. The 40-hour week served us through the industrial age and into the information age. But we're crossing into something different now. An age where intelligence is augmented by machines, where location matters less than ever, where the scarcest resource isn't labor, it's attention. And attention cannot be sustained for 40 hours of focused output week after week, year after year, without diminishing returns. The quiet revolution is this. We're finally admitting it. The trials prove it. The data confirms it. The workers know it. And slowly, carefully, the economic structures that govern our lives are beginning to acknowledge a truth that should have been obvious all along. Humans aren't machines. We never were. And the future belongs to systems that treat us accordingly. This is where the transformation begins. Not in 2040. Not in some distant future. Right now. In offices in Iceland and boardrooms in Dubai. In pilots across the UK and trials in Portugal. In quiet conversations where workers ask for one simple thing, time to live. And in spreadsheets where executives realize that giving them that time doesn't cost anything. It pays. There's a number that should terrify every business leader on this planet. 82%. That's how many employees are currently at risk of burnout in 2025. Not tired, not stressed occasionally. At risk of complete psychological and physical collapse from work-related exhaustion. 82%. If that were a disease, we'd call it a pandemic. But because it's just work, we call it normal. Let's talk about what happens when you treat human beings like machines that can run indefinitely without maintenance. The World Health Organization doesn't use the word burnout casually. They define it as chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed, characterized by 3 specific symptoms: energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. In simpler terms, you're too tired to function. You stop caring about work that used to matter to you, and you become worse at your job, even when you try. This isn't laziness. It's physiological breakdown. And right now, it's everywhere. 77% of workers report experiencing burnout at their current job, with more than half saying it happened multiple times. That means if you're in an office with 10 people, at least 7 of them are running on fumes. The person next to you, the manager above you, probably you. This is the baseline condition of modern work. But here's where the numbers become truly staggering. Burnout isn't just destroying people, it's destroying economies. The global cost of disengaged workers, many of whom are burned out, reached $8.8 trillion in 2024. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the combined GDP of Japan and Germany. We're burning through the economic output of 2 of the world's largest economies every single year simply because we refuse to let people rest. In the United States alone, burnout costs businesses $322 billion annually in lost productivity. Healthcare costs related to workplace burnout range from $125 billion to $190 billion each year. These aren't abstract numbers. This is money businesses spend treating symptoms of a problem they're actively creating. Employees burn out. They get sick. They need medical care. They take time off. Companies pay for all of it, and then they replace workers who leave and start the cycle again with someone new. The pattern is so predictable, it's almost mathematical. Employees experiencing burnout are 63% more likely to take a sick day. They're 23% more likely to require medical attention. They're 2.6 times more likely to actively seek a different job. When they do leave, replacing them costs anywhere from 50% to 200% of their annual salary, depending on their role. For physicians alone, every doctor who leaves due to burnout costs the organization between $500,000 and $1 million. And yet, despite these crushing financial costs, most organizations do nothing meaningful about it. They add a meditation app to their benefits package. They host a wellness seminar. They tell employees to practice self-care, as if the problem is individual failure rather than systemic design. It's like telling someone drowning in the ocean to remember to breathe. Let's look at who's drowning first. The healthcare sector leads with the most brutal burnout rates. 48% of physicians report experiencing at least one symptom of burnout. For nurses, it's 62%. These are the people we depend on when we're most vulnerable, and more than half of them are emotionally and physically depleted. Without intervention, burnout costs the U.S. healthcare system $4.6 billion a year, largely through physician turnover and reduced work hours. Technology comes next. Despite ping-pong tables and free lunches and claims of progressive culture, 82% of tech employees report feeling close to burnout. The pressure to innovate constantly, the always-on culture, the expectation that dedication means sacrificing everything else. It's crushing an entire industry from the inside. Services, tourism, and restaurants hit 82% burnout rates. Construction and real estate reach 77%. Even lawyers, who bill by the hour and are trained to endure pressure, report 73% burnout rates, with 27% saying they feel burned out daily. There is no industry that's immune. This is systemic. But there's a pattern within the pattern that reveals something even more troubling. Burnout used to be something that happened to people in their 40s after decades of grinding work. Not anymore. Gen Z and millennials now hit peak burnout at just 25 years old. 25. That's 17 years earlier than the average American who experiences peak burnout at 42. We're watching an entire generation burn out before they've even established their careers. 9 in 10 workers aged 18 to 24 experienced high or extreme levels of pressure or stress in the past year. They're 3 times more likely than workers over 55 to need time off due to deteriorating health caused by waiting for NHS appointments. They report the highest rates of being absent due to poor mental health caused by stress. And here's the truly alarming part. They're the least likely to open up to their line managers about their stress levels. The generation that needs the most support is the least likely to ask for it, because they've already learned that admitting struggle is seen as weakness. Women experience burnout at significantly higher rates than men, with the gap more than doubling since 2019. Remote workers, despite the flexibility everyone assumed would help them, face 20% higher burnout risk than their office-based counterparts. Middle managers, squeezed between leadership demands and team needs, are burning out at unprecedented rates. 4 in 10 stressed managers have seriously considered leaving their roles altogether. Nearly half worry about being laid off, so they push themselves beyond sustainable limits, trying to prove their value, which only accelerates their collapse. The causes aren't mysterious. Job insecurity tops the list. 35% of employees and 45% of middle managers worry about losing their jobs in 2025. That anxiety pushes people to overextend themselves, blur work-life boundaries, work longer hours, skip rest, all to appear indispensable. But you can't sustain that. Nobody can. Increased workload without added support is crushing teams everywhere. Roles that used to be shared across multiple people are now dumped on whoever remains after layoffs and hiring freezes. People are juggling responsibilities that were never meant to be handled by one human being. Lack of meaningful recognition corrodes motivation. Nearly 1 in 3 employees haven't been recognized for their work at all in the past year. Not once. When people feel undervalued, they disengage. When they disengage while still being forced to perform, burnout is inevitable. Unclear communication from leadership amplifies stress. When priorities shift without explanation, when goals aren't articulated, when changes happen without context, employees fill in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. That uncertainty drains energy faster than actual work. Mental health stigma remains a massive barrier. 40% of Gen Z workers feel depressed or anxious multiple times per week, yet 46% avoid seeking help due to stigma. They're suffering in silence while their productivity collapses. And now, rapid AI adoption is adding a new layer of pressure. 57% of Americans report AI is already impacting their jobs, yet 56% admit they don't feel prepared to use it effectively. They're being asked to learn new systems, adapt to shifting responsibilities, and prove their value in roles that feel increasingly uncertain, all while maintaining the same output expectations. This is the reality behind the 40-hour workweek. It's not just failing. It's actively destroying the people it claims to employ. The mathematics are brutal and simple. You cannot extract 40-plus hours of focused cognitive labor from human beings week after week without rest, recognition, or reasonable workload and expect them to remain functional. The data proves it. The hospital admissions prove it. The turnover rates prove it. The $8.8 trillion in lost productivity proves it. But here's what should give you hope. Remember those 4-day workweek trials we talked about in the first episode? The ones that showed increased productivity and revenue. Those same trials revealed something profound about burnout. 39% less stress, 71% reduction in burnout symptoms. Sleep improved, anxiety decreased. Mental and physical health scores rose across almost every category. The solution exists. We know what works. Give people time to be human. The question is whether we have the courage to restructure systems that were designed when we didn't know better. We know better now. The numbers are screaming at us. 82% of workers at risk of burnout isn't sustainable. It's not even functional. It's just expensive suffering that benefits nobody. The 40-hour week isn't dying because of trends or preferences. It's dying because it's killing us. And we've finally gathered enough data to prove it. There's a sentence buried in a Goldman Sachs research report that should make everyone pause. By 2045, as much as 50% of jobs may be fully automated. 50%. Half of all work currently done by human beings, handled by machines. That's not science fiction. That's the projection from one of the world's most influential financial institutions, based on current technological trajectories and adoption rates. But here's what most people miss when they hear numbers like that. The transformation isn't arriving in 2045. It's happening right now, in 2025, and it's accelerating faster than anyone predicted. Let's start with what we know for certain. A World Economic Forum survey, released in early 2025, revealed that 41% of employers worldwide intend to reduce their workforce as AI automates certain tasks between now and 2030. Not might consider. Intend to. These are concrete plans already being implemented. In fact, 76,000 positions were eliminated due to AI automation in 2025 alone. Those aren't future job losses. Those are people who went to work one day and found out machines could do their job better, faster, and cheaper. McKinsey projects that by 2030, just 5 years from now, 30% of current U.S. employment could be automated, with 60% of all jobs significantly modified through AI interventions. Think about what that means. If you work in an office of 10 people, 3 of those positions might not exist in 5 years, and the remaining 7? Their jobs will look fundamentally different than they do today. The scale becomes even more staggering when you zoom out globally. The World Economic Forum predicts that 92 million jobs will be displaced by 2030. 92 million. That's roughly the entire population of Germany losing their current employment. But before panic sets in, there's another number that matters just as much. 170 million new jobs will emerge in the same time frame. So yes, AI will destroy millions of positions, but it will also create significantly more opportunities than it eliminates, resulting in a net gain of 78 million jobs worldwide. That sounds reassuring until you understand the catch. These aren't one-to-one swaps. The jobs disappearing and the jobs appearing aren't in the same places, requiring the same skills or accessible to the same people. A 50-year-old data entry clerk in Ohio whose job gets automated isn't automatically qualified for a newly created AI ethics officer position in San Francisco that requires a master's degree. In fact, 77% of new AI-related jobs require master's degrees. The displacement is immediate and concentrated. The creation is gradual and distributed. That gap is where the human cost lives. So who gets hit first? Customer service representatives face the highest immediate risk with 80% automation. Expected by 2025. That's already happening. The chatbot you interact with when you have a problem with your phone bill, your bank account, your airline reservation, that used to be a human being earning a living. Now it's an AI trained on millions of previous conversations, available 24 hours a day, never needing breaks, never getting frustrated, never asking for raises. Companies save $8 billion annually just from AI chatbots alone. Data entry clerks are next. 7.5 million of those positions will be eliminated by 2027, 2 years from now. These are jobs that involve taking information from one system and inputting it into another, verifying records, processing forms. Tasks that are repetitive, rule-based, and predictable. Exactly what AI excels at. Retail cashiers face 65% automation risk by 2025. Self-checkout systems were just the beginning. Stores are now testing completely automated retail experiences where you walk in, grab what you need, and walk out. Cameras and sensors track everything. Your account gets charged automatically. No human interaction required. Amazon's Just Walk Out technology is already operating in dozens of locations. Every major retailer is watching to see if it scales. Manufacturing workers face significant medium-term displacement, with 2 million positions at risk by 2030. Robots on assembly lines aren't new, but what's changing is their capability and cost. A robotic arm that can weld, paint, assemble, and inspect used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and require specialized programming. Now you can lease AI-powered robots for less than minimum wage, train them by demonstrating tasks a few times, and have them working alongside humans within days. The economics are becoming impossible for companies to ignore. Transportation employees, particularly the 1.5 million trucking jobs at risk by 2030, face a particularly brutal transition. Autonomous vehicles are already hauling freight on specific routes in Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. Every mile driven generates data that makes the systems better. Every improvement makes the business case stronger. Long-haul trucking, one of the most common jobs in America that can't be outsourced overseas, is about to be automated domestically. The World Economic Forum identifies postal service clerks, executive secretaries, and payroll clerks as roles facing the most rapid decline. And for the first time in their annual reports, they've added graphic designers and legal secretaries to the list of vulnerable positions. That's significant. Those are knowledge-based roles requiring creativity and judgment, tasks we were told AI couldn't handle. Generative AI proved us wrong. Tools like Midjourney and DALL-E can create professional quality designs in seconds based on text descriptions. Legal AI can draft contracts, research case law, and summarize depositions faster than any human paralegal. But here's where the story gets more nuanced. AI isn't just destroying jobs, it's transforming them. 60% of US workers today are in occupations that didn't exist in 1940. More than 85% of employment growth over the past 80 years came from technology-driven job creation. Every major technological shift, from electricity to computers to the internet, followed the same pattern. Initial displacement, then adaptation, then expansion into roles nobody predicted. AI is following that pattern, but faster. The WEF predicts AI and automation will transform 86% of businesses by 2030. Not replace them, transform them. That means most jobs won't disappear entirely. They'll evolve. Accountants won't be replaced by AI. They'll become financial strategists who use AI to handle calculations and data analysis while they focus on interpretation and advice. Nurses won't be automated. They'll work alongside diagnostic AI that catches patterns humans miss, freeing them to spend more time on patient care and emotional support. Teachers won't vanish. They'll personalize education using AI tutors that adapt to each student's learning pace while they handle the irreplaceable human elements of motivation, mentorship, and inspiration. 350,000 new AI-related positions are emerging, including prompt engineers, human AI collaboration specialists, and AI ethics officers. These didn't exist 5 years ago. Now they're critical roles commanding high salaries. But they require skills most workers don't have yet, which is why 77% of companies surveyed plan to retrain and upskill their current employees between 2025 and 2030. The timeline for this transformation has accelerated dramatically. Goldman Sachs estimates that when AI is fully adopted and incorporated into regular production, it will raise labor productivity in developed markets by around 15%. That's enormous. For context, the introduction of personal computers into the workplace in the 1980s increased productivity by about 10% over a decade. AI is on track to deliver larger gains in less time. But productivity gains don't automatically translate to maintained employment. Temporary unemployment caused by adoption of labor-saving technologies typically increases the U.S. jobless rate by 0.3 percentage points for every 1 percentage point gain in technology-driven productivity. The impact is usually fleeting, disappearing after about 2 years. But those 2 years are brutal for the people living through them. And when displacement happens faster than workers can retrain and relocate, entire communities collapse. There's already evidence this is happening in the tech sector. Tech employment has fallen below its pre-pandemic trend, a pattern likely related to AI automation. Unemployment among 20 to 30-year-olds in tech-exposed occupations has risen by almost 3 percentage points since the start of 2025. These are recent college graduates, people who did everything right, got the degrees they were told would guarantee employment, and are now discovering that entry-level coding, design, and data analysis roles are being absorbed by AI faster than companies can hire humans to fill them. Geographic analysis reveals another troubling pattern. 58.87 million women in the U.S. workforce occupy positions highly exposed to AI automation, compared to 48.62 million men. The gender disparity is significant because women are disproportionately concentrated in administrative support, customer service, and data processing roles that face the highest automation risk. This isn't accidental. It's structural, and it will widen existing inequality unless interventions happen quickly. Regional variations compound the problem. North America leads AI adoption at 70% by 2025. Advanced and middle-income economies show widespread use of generative AI, while low-income economies show limited implementation. That means wealthy countries will reap the productivity benefits, while poor countries lag behind, widening the global economic gap. And within wealthy countries, tech hubs like San Francisco, Seattle, and Austin capture the new jobs, while manufacturing towns in the Midwest lose theirs. The jobs vanish in one location and reappear hundreds or thousands of miles away, leaving displaced workers stranded. But despite all this disruption, Goldman Sachs researchers remain skeptical that AI will lead to large employment reductions over the long term. Their analysis of history suggests that technology change tends to boost demand for workers in new occupations, either directly through jobs that emerge from technological change or indirectly by triggering an overall boost in output and demand. Predictions that technology will reduce the need for human labor have a long history but a poor track record. The key variable is speed. If displaced workers can be re-employed within 1 year, the model shows automation lifting the overall economy. Full employment is maintained in both the short and long term. Wages grow faster, and productivity is higher. But in scenarios where displaced workers take years to find new work, unemployment rises in the short to medium term. The labor market eventually adjusts and unemployment falls, but with slower average wage growth and dampened long-term growth. So here's the reality we're facing. AI isn't coming for jobs. It's already here, already automating millions of positions, already reshaping what work means. The question isn't whether this happens, it's how fast, and whether we adapt quickly enough to avoid mass suffering during the transition. Because the fundamental equation has changed. For the first time in history, we have technology capable of performing not just physical labor, but cognitive labor at scale. And that changes everything about the 40-hour work week. Because if machines can handle the repetitive, predictable, rule-based components of work, what's left for humans is creativity, judgment, empathy, and strategic thinking. Those aren't tasks you can sustain for 40 hours a week. They require deep focus, which neuroscience tells us humans can only maintain for about 4 to 5 hours per day before quality degrades significantly. The 40-hour week made sense when work meant physical presence and manual output. It makes no sense in a world where the most valuable human contribution is insight, and insight can't be forced or scheduled. AI isn't just displacing jobs. It's exposing the fundamental mismatch between how we structure work and what work actually requires from human beings. The machines aren't taking over. They're taking the boring parts, the exhausting parts, the parts that burn people out. What they're leaving behind is the work only humans can do. And that work looks nothing like 40 hours a week of grinding output. That's not a threat. It's an invitation to reimagine everything. Here's a truth that breaks every traditional business assumption. Companies that reduced their work week to 4 days saw their revenues increase by 1.4% during the trial period. Not stay flat. Not decline slightly with promises of long-term benefits. Increase immediately. While people worked fewer hours. That shouldn't be possible according to classical economic theory. Labor equals output. More hours equals more production. Less time equals less revenue. Except the data says otherwise. And when reality contradicts theory, reality wins. Let's examine the mathematics of working less. The UK's 4-day week pilot, which tracked 61 companies across multiple industries for 6 months, revealed something economists are still trying to fully explain. Not only did revenues rise, but operational costs dropped significantly. Sick days fell by 65%. That's not a small improvement. That's employees becoming measurably healthier when given time to rest. And healthier employees don't just feel better. They cost less. Every sick day avoided saves companies an average of $340 in lost productivity and replacement labor costs. Multiply that across thousands of employees, and the savings become substantial. Staff turnover dropped 57% during the same period. To understand why this matters economically, consider what turnover actually costs. Replacing an employee typically runs 50 to 200% of their annual salary depending on the role. For a worker earning $50,000, that's $25,000 to $100,000 in recruitment, hiring, onboarding, and productivity loss, while the new person gets up to speed. When turnover drops by more than half, companies save millions in replacement costs, while retaining institutional knowledge and experienced workers who know how to operate efficiently. The gig economy, which is expected to grow significantly by 2030, is revealing another economic pattern that challenges traditional assumptions. Freelancers, contractors, and independent workers aren't paid by the hour. They're paid for deliverables. A graphic designer charges for the logo, not for the 8 hours it might take to create it. A software developer bills for the functioning app, not for the weeks spent coding. A consultant gets paid for solving the problem, not for sitting in meetings. This outcome-based payment model is fundamentally incompatible with the 40-hour week mentality, and it's spreading. More workers are shifting to freelance and contract arrangements where compensation is tied directly to results rather than time spent. This isn't just creative professionals anymore. Healthcare workers are picking up shifts through apps. Lawyers are doing project-based legal work. Accountants are offering fractional CFO services. Teachers are creating online courses. The traditional employment relationship, where you sell 40 hours per week to one employer who directs how you spend that time, is becoming just one option among many, and often not the most attractive one. Remote work statistics from 2025 show 48% of work globally is now conducted remotely. When people work from home, the 40-hour construct becomes even more absurd. There's no commute to pad the day, no office small talk to fill time, no meetings scheduled just because the conference room was available. Remote workers report completing their actual productive work in far fewer hours than office-based employees. which is why remote workers show 31% engagement compared to 19% for on-site workers. They're getting the same amount of actual work done in less time, with higher quality and satisfaction. This creates an economic incentive that can't be ignored. If a company can get equal or better output from workers doing 4 focused days remotely than 5 distracted days in an office, why wouldn't they make that switch? The office space costs less. Utilities drop. Commuter benefits aren't needed. And workers are happier, healthier, and more loyal. Every financial metric improves. Now, layer in universal basic income experiments, which have been tested in various countries with surprising results. The conventional economic wisdom says if you give people money without requiring them to work, they'll stop working. Except that's not what happened. Universal basic income trials showed positive effects on employment in many cases. People didn't quit their jobs en masse. They used the financial security to take risks, start businesses, retrain for better careers, or negotiate for better working conditions. The economic activity increased rather than decreased because people had the stability to make longer-term decisions rather than desperate short-term choices. This connects directly to the changing nature of work value. The World Economic Forum's 2025 Future of Jobs report predicts that over the next 5 years, 39% of existing skill sets will be transformed or become outdated. 39%. That means the skills that make someone valuable today might be irrelevant by 2030. In that environment, what matters isn't how many hours you can sit at a desk. It's how quickly you can learn, adapt, and apply new capabilities to emerging problems. Analytical thinking remains the most sought-after skill, with 70% of organizations deeming it essential. But here's the thing about analytical thinking. You can't do it for 40 hours straight. Neuroscience research consistently shows that deep cognitive work, the kind that requires sustained focus and complex problem solving, can only be maintained for about 4 to 6 hours per day before quality degrades dramatically. After that, you're just performing the appearance of work while producing diminishing returns. Companies are starting to understand this. The shift toward skills-based hiring over credential-based hiring reflects a fundamental economic reorientation. Instead of paying for degrees and years of experience, employers are paying for demonstrated capabilities and outcomes. And capabilities aren't measured in hours worked. They're measured in problems solved, innovations created, and value delivered. Consider what this means for compensation structures. If you're paying someone for their ability to think creatively and solve complex problems, and that ability can only be exercised effectively for a few hours each day, why are you requiring them to be present for 40 hours? You're paying for 8 hours and getting 4 hours of actual value. The other 4 are waste. Expensive, productivity-destroying waste that burns people out and increases turnover. The economic case becomes even clearer when examining specific industries. In technology, where innovation drives competitive advantage, companies discovered that giving engineers 1 day per week for personal projects and learning dramatically increased their output during the other 4 days. Google's famous 20% time policy, which led to the creation of Gmail and Google Maps, wasn't generosity. It was economics. Letting people explore, recharge, and follow their curiosity made them more valuable, not less. Healthcare provides another compelling example. Physician burnout costs the U.S. healthcare system $4.6 billion annually through turnover and reduced hours. But when hospitals experimented with shorter shifts and mandatory recovery time, patient outcomes improved, medical errors decreased, and doctor retention increased. The economic logic is obvious. A well-rested doctor makes better decisions, which leads to better patient care, which reduces malpractice costs, readmission rates, and mortality. Paying doctors to work less actually saves money by improving the quality of the work they do. The gig economy's explosive. Growth isn't just about flexibility, it's about efficiency. When workers can choose when, where, and how much they work, they self-optimize for their peak performance hours. Morning people work mornings. Night people work nights. People with caregiving responsibilities work around those obligations. The result is a workforce that's consistently operating closer to its maximum capability, rather than forcing everyone into the same arbitrary 9-to-5, Monday through Friday schedule, regardless of when they're actually productive. This creates a labor market where employers compete not just on salary, but on quality of life, autonomy, and flexibility. 83% of workers in 2025 say work-life balance is more important than pay when evaluating jobs. That's a complete inversion of traditional assumptions. Salary used to be the primary lever for attracting talent. Now it's table stakes. What differentiates employers is whether they treat people like humans with lives outside work, or like resources to be extracted from. Companies that understand this have a massive competitive advantage in recruiting and retaining top talent. Companies that don't are struggling to hire and experiencing constant turnover, which makes them less efficient, less innovative, and less profitable. The market is rewarding flexibility and punishing rigidity. That's not ideology, that's economics. Let's talk about productivity metrics themselves. The conventional measure is output per hour worked. But that metric made sense in manufacturing, where each hour on an assembly line produced a quantifiable number of widgets. In knowledge work, it's meaningless. A software engineer might spend 3 days stuck on a problem, then solve it in 20 minutes after a good night's sleep. Did they work for 3 days or 20 minutes? Which hours count? The better metric is output per unit of human attention and energy. And by that measure, the 40-hour week is catastrophically inefficient. You're spreading limited attention and energy across too many hours, diluting its effectiveness. When workers compress their productive time into fewer, more focused hours, the quality and quantity of output both increase because attention isn't being wasted on filler. Microsoft Japan's 40% productivity increase from a 4-day week proves this mathematically. They got nearly 1.5 times the output in 80% of the time. That's not workers suddenly becoming better at their jobs. That's workers finally being allowed to work at their natural capacity instead of being forced to artificially extend their presence to fill an arbitrary time requirement. The economics of less are simple once you understand what you're actually paying for. You're not buying hours. You're buying outcomes, insights, creativity, and problem solving. Those things can't be sustained for 40 hours per week. Trying to force them into that time frame is like running a car engine constantly at redline and wondering why it keeps breaking down. You're not maximizing output. You're destroying the machinery. The companies that figure this out first will dominate their industries. The ones that cling to outdated models will spend increasing amounts of money on recruitment, turnover, burnout-related costs, and productivity loss while wondering why their competitors are pulling ahead. The economics don't lie. Working less when done strategically and with intention, produces better results at lower cost, with happier, healthier, more loyal workers. That's not a future possibility. That's happening right now. The data is in. The trials are complete. The business case is proven. The 40-hour week isn't just morally questionable anymore. It's economically obsolete. And in capitalism, obsolete models don't survive. They get replaced by more efficient ones. The economics of less aren't about sacrifice. They're about optimization. And the math is undeniable. There's something profound happening to the relationship between work and place, and most people haven't fully grasped what it means. In 2025, 48% of all work globally is conducted remotely, nearly half. That's not an experiment anymore. That's not a pandemic-era anomaly that will fade. That's a permanent restructuring of where and when work happens. And once geography becomes optional, the 40-hour work week loses one of its foundational justifications. Think about what the traditional work schedule was actually designed around. You had to be at a specific location at a specific time because that's where the machinery was, where the files were, where your colleagues were, where the boss could see you working. The 9-to-5, Monday through Friday model made logistical sense when coordination required physical presence. Everyone needed to be in the same room at the same time to collaborate, make decisions, and move work forward. But when nearly half of all work happens remotely, that constraint disappears. And with it, the entire logic of synchronized schedules begins to crumble. Remote workers in 2025 report 31% engagement levels compared to just 19% for on-site workers. That's a massive gap. The people working from home are significantly more connected to their work than those commuting to offices. This contradicts everything we were told about the importance of face-to-face interaction and corporate culture. Turns out, sitting in traffic for an hour, enduring fluorescent lighting and open-plan noise pollution, and attending meetings that could have been emails doesn't actually increase engagement. It decreases it. And here's where it connects to hours worked. Remote employees consistently report completing their actual productive work in far fewer hours than their office-based counterparts. Without the commute, the office small talk, the visible presence requirements, the meetings scheduled just to fill time, they focus on actual deliverables. They work in bursts of deep concentration, take breaks when they need them, and structure their days around energy levels rather than arbitrary start and end times. This creates a natural experiment in productivity measurement. When you can't see someone sitting at their desk for 8 hours, you have to evaluate them based on what they produce. And when companies made that shift, they discovered something uncomfortable. A lot of office work was performative. People weren't actually producing for 40 hours per week. They were producing for maybe 20 or 25 hours and filling the rest with the appearance of productivity. Remote work exposed that illusion. And once exposed, it can't be rebuilt. 83% of workers favor hybrid arrangements in 2025. Not fully remote for everyone, but the flexibility to choose where they work based on what the work requires. Strategic planning session with the whole team? Come to the office. Deep focus work on a complex problem. Work from wherever you're most effective. Need to coordinate across time zones? Work when it makes sense for the collaboration, not when the corporate handbook says you should be at your desk. This flexibility fundamentally changes how we think about time. In the old model, you sold your employer 40 hours per week, and they directed how every minute was spent. In the new model, you deliver outcomes, and you determine the most effective way to achieve them. Sometimes that means working intensely for 6 hours on Tuesday. Sometimes it means taking Wednesday off to recharge and coming back fresh on Thursday. Sometimes it means collaborating with colleagues in Singapore at 11 p.m. because that's when they're starting their day. The shift isn't just about location. It's about asynchronous collaboration, replacing synchronized schedules. When teams are distributed across time zones, real-time meetings become the exception rather than the default. People communicate through documented updates, recorded video messages, and collaborative tools that don't require everyone to be online simultaneously. Work becomes a relay race rather than a synchronized swim routine, and this model works better. Teams using asynchronous communication report higher productivity because people can respond when they're at peak cognitive function rather than whenever a meeting happens to be scheduled. A developer in Berlin doesn't have to join a call at 7 a.m. to accommodate colleagues in San Francisco. They document their progress, share it, and the San Francisco team reviews it during their workday, then continues the work forward. The project moves continuously without anyone sacrificing sleep or family time. Digital nomadism has exploded as a direct result of this untethering. When your work doesn't require a specific location or specific hours, why limit yourself to one city? People are spending 3 months in Portugal, then 3 months in Thailand, then 3 months in Mexico, working the entire time but experiencing different cultures, costs of living, and time zones. Companies are discovering that this doesn't hurt productivity. In many cases, it enhances it because people return energized and inspired. The gig economy connects directly to this geographic flexibility. When you're a freelancer or contractor, you work from wherever makes sense. A graphic designer in rural Ireland can serve clients in New York. A software developer in Buenos Aires can build products for companies in London. A consultant in Cape Town can advise businesses in Singapore. Geography has become irrelevant for knowledge work, and the gig economy is massive and growing. The shift toward outcome-based rather than time-based compensation accelerates when geography disappears. If a client in Tokyo hires a writer in Barcelona to produce an article, they don't care if it takes 4 hours or 40 hours to write. They care about the quality of the final piece. This forces both parties to think in terms of value delivered rather than time spent. Traditional employment relationships are adapting to this reality slowly and reluctantly. Some companies are embracing full flexibility, allowing employees to work from anywhere with any schedule as long as outcomes are met. Others are demanding return to office, clinging to the belief that presence equals productivity. The data consistently shows that the companies embracing flexibility are winning the talent war. The ones demanding presence are losing experienced workers to competitors who offer better quality of life. 70% of job seekers in 2025 say flexibility is their top priority when evaluating positions. Not salary, not title. Flexibility, the ability to control when, where, and how they work. This represents a fundamental power shift in the labor market. For decades, employers held all the leverage. They set the terms, and workers either accepted them or found different jobs with similar terms. But when flexibility becomes the primary differentiator and talent is scarce, workers gain leverage. They can demand arrangements that fit their lives rather than arranging their lives to fit work schedules designed a century ago for factory production. The 40-hour week was always tied to place. You had to be at the factory for 8 hours because the machines were there. You had to be at the office for 8 hours because that's where the information was stored and where decisions were made. But when the factory is your laptop and the office is a cloud-based collaboration platform, those constraints evaporate. What remains is the question nobody wanted to ask. If we're not constrained by location, why are we still constrained by arbitrary time requirements? Some companies are experimenting with results-only work environments where there are no schedules at all. You're given projects with deadlines. How and when you complete them is entirely up to you. Want to work 20 hours one week and 60 the next? Fine, as long as the work gets done. Want to take Tuesday through Thursday off and work Saturday and Sunday? No problem. Want to work from 6 a.m. to noon and then spend the afternoon with your kids? Go ahead. Early results from these experiments show dramatic increases in productivity, engagement, and retention. When you trust people to manage their own time and hold them accountable for outcomes, most people rise to that trust. They work more efficiently because they're not padding hours. They're more creative because they work when they're energized rather than when the clock dictates. They're more loyal because the company treats them like adults with lives instead of resources to be scheduled. This connects to the burnout epidemic we discussed earlier. When work is tied to specific hours and specific locations, people have no control over their energy management. You're exhausted, but you still have to sit at your desk until 5 p.m. You're in a creative flow state, but you have to stop because it's time to commute home. The mismatch between biological rhythms and organizational requirements destroys well-being. But when geography becomes optional and schedules become flexible, people can optimize for their own peak performance. Night owls work at night. Morning people work early. People with caregiving responsibilities work around those obligations. Everyone operates closer to their maximum capacity because they're working with their biology instead of against it. The data from remote work studies consistently shows this improvement. Remote workers sleep better, exercise more, eat healthier, and spend more time with family. Not because they're working less, but because they're not wasting 2 hours per day commuting. They can prepare meals instead of eating fast food. They can exercise during their natural energy dips instead of forcing themselves to focus through them. And they can be present for their children's lives instead of missing everything between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. This isn't just about individual well-being. It's about economic efficiency. When people are healthier, they're more productive. When they're less stressed, they make better decisions. When they have work-life integration instead of work-life conflict, they bring their full selves to their work instead of showing up depleted and resentful. The 40-hour week made sense in a world where work required your physical body to be in a specific location, operating specific equipment on a synchronized schedule with other physical bodies. But we don't live in that world anymore. Nearly half of all work happens remotely. Collaboration happens asynchronously. Value is measured by outcomes, not presence. And the constraints that made synchronized 40-hour weeks necessary have dissolved. What we're left with is inertia. We're still organizing work around a model designed for conditions that no longer exist because changing organizational structures is hard and uncomfortable. But the economic incentives are aligning against that inertia. Companies that offer flexibility are attracting better talent. Remote workers are more engaged and productive. Asynchronous collaboration eliminates the productivity loss from time zone challenges. And workers increasingly refuse to accept geographic and temporal constraints that serve no purpose except maintaining outdated management practices. Geography became optional when the internet matured and cloud computing made distributed work seamless. Time is becoming optional as we recognize that knowledge work can't be sustained for 40 hours of focused output and doesn't need to be synchronized across all workers. The two changes are interconnected. Once you remove the place constraint, the time constraint becomes obviously arbitrary. By 2040, the idea of requiring someone to be in a specific building for 40 hours per week will seem as outdated as requiring them to use a typewriter instead of a computer. Not because it's morally wrong, though it often is, but because it's economically inefficient, organizationally obsolete, and competitively disadvantageous. The companies clinging to it will be outperformed by the ones who adapted. Geography is already optional for nearly half of all workers. Time is next. And once both constraints are removed, what remains is simply this: outcomes matter, presence doesn't. That's not a future prediction. That's the present reality that organizational structures are slowly, reluctantly accepting. The future of work isn't 40 hours in an office. It's delivering value from wherever and whenever makes sense. And that future is already here for those who've stopped pretending otherwise. There's a number that should make every corporate executive deeply uncomfortable. Only 6% of Gen Z workers aspire to leadership positions. 6%. An entire generation entering the workforce has looked at what it takes to climb the corporate ladder and decided almost unanimously that it's not worth it. This isn't laziness. This is a fundamental rejection of the value system that built the 40-hour workweek, and it's going to reshape everything. Let's understand who we're talking about. Gen Z, people born roughly between 1997 and 2012, now make up a significant portion of the workforce. By 2025, they're not just interns anymore. They're mid-level employees, managers, entrepreneurs, and they have completely different expectations about work than any generation before them. 89% of Gen Z and millennials say they need to find purpose and meaning in their work to be satisfied with their jobs. Not want, need. For them, a paycheck alone isn't sufficient justification for spending 40 hours per week doing something. The work has to matter. It has to align with their values. It has to contribute to something larger than quarterly profits. 86% of Gen Z demand purpose-driven work. They will walk away from high-paying positions if the work feels meaningless or if the company's values conflict with their own. This is unprecedented. Previous generations might have complained about soul-crushing jobs, but they stayed because the economic security mattered more. Gen Z is saying economic security isn't worth spiritual death, and they have the leverage to make that demand. In a tight labor market where companies are desperately competing for talent, workers with in-demand skills can be selective. They can turn down offers that don't meet their criteria. They can quit jobs that violate their boundaries, and increasingly, they do. Deloitte's 2025 Global Gen Z and Millennial Survey reveals something profound about their relationship with employment. Work-life balance has become the single most important factor when evaluating job opportunities. Not career advancement, not salary, not prestige, balance. The ability to have a life outside work that's equally valued and protected. This generation watched their parents sacrifice everything for careers that laid them off during recessions or burned them out by 50. They watched the social contract between employer and employee disintegrate. Pensions disappeared. Job security evaporated. Loyalty became a one-way street where companies expected devotion but offered none in return. Gen Z learned the lesson. The company will never love you back, so don't organize your entire life around it. The burnout statistics for young workers are staggering. 9 in 10 workers aged 18 to 24 experienced high or extreme levels of pressure or stress in the past year. 25 years old has become the peak burnout age for Gen Z and millennials, 17 years earlier than the average American. They're collapsing before they've even established themselves. And instead of accepting this as inevitable, they're demanding structural change. 40% of Gen Z workers feel depressed or anxious multiple times per week. That's not a mental health crisis. That's a work design crisis. When nearly half of young workers are chronically anxious and depressed, the problem isn't individual resilience. It's the system demanding more than humans can sustainably give. But here's what makes Gen Z different. They're willing to talk about it. Previous generations suffered in silence because admitting struggle meant professional death. Gen Z normalized discussing mental health openly. They're not ashamed of setting boundaries. They're not apologetic about prioritizing well-being over productivity. This cultural shift is forcing companies to either adapt or lose access to an entire generation of talent. 70% of job seekers in 2025, dominated by younger workers, say flexibility is their top priority when evaluating positions. Flexibility means different things depending on context. The ability to work remotely, the ability to set your own hours, the ability to take time off without guilt, the ability to structure your day around your life rather than structuring your life around work. Gen Z sees through the corporate theater that older generations accepted. They know that most meetings are unnecessary. They know that presenteeism, being visibly at your desk, even when you're not productive, is performative waste. They know that the 40-hour week often stretches to 50 or 60 through email, after hours and weekend work, disguised as being a team player. And they refuse to participate in that performance. This is showing up in employment patterns. Gen Z workers change jobs more frequently than any previous generation. They're not loyal to employers who aren't loyal to them. When a job stops serving their needs or violates their boundaries, they leave. Companies call this job hopping and complain about lack of commitment. Gen Z calls it rational self-interest and wonders why they should commit to organizations that treat them as disposable resources. The gig economy has particular appeal to this generation. 25% of digital nomads, many of them Gen Z, are entrepreneurs and solopreneurs running location-independent businesses. They've rejected traditional employment entirely, choosing instead to build their own income streams with complete control over when, where, and how much they work. Freelancers make up 41% of digital nomads, tapping into the gig economy for flexibility and variety. This isn't because they don't want to work hard. Digital nomads report 84% job satisfaction. 67% rate their quality of life as better than before becoming nomadic. They work intensely when they're working, but they maintain boundaries that protect the rest of their lives. And they're willing to accept income uncertainty in exchange for autonomy. The digital nomad population has exploded to over 50 million people globally in 2025, up from 35 million just 2 years earlier. That's a 43% increase in 2 years. These aren't all Gen Z, obviously, but younger workers make up a disproportionate share. 56% of digital nomads are millennials, with 27% from Gen Z. Combined, that's 83% of location-independent workers under 45 years old. And here's what matters. The average digital nomad is 34 to 36 years old. These aren't college kids on gap years. They're established professionals with legitimate careers, often earning above average incomes. The average annual income for digital nomads ranges from 58,000 to 128,000 euros. The highest earners, developers, and data analysts and product managers make significantly more. These are people with options who are choosing flexibility over traditional career paths. 56% of digital nomads now hold traditional full-time jobs with companies that allow remote work. They're not all freelancers. They're employees who negotiated or selected positions that don't require physical presence. Companies that refuse to offer this flexibility lost these workers to competitors who did. That's how markets work. When one side has leverage and clear preferences, the other side adapts or loses. Gen Z is also redefining what career success looks like. Previous generations measured success by titles, salaries, office size, number of direct reports. Gen Z measures success by quality of life, alignment with values, autonomy, and time for relationships and experiences. The fact that only 6% aspire to leadership isn't apathy. It's a cost-benefit analysis. They've watched leaders work 70-hour weeks, sacrifice their health and families, and exist in a state of perpetual stress. And they've decided that trade-off doesn't make sense. This creates a looming leadership crisis for traditional organizations. If nobody from the younger generation wants to be a manager, who will run companies in 15 years? The answer is either companies will have to completely redesign what leadership looks like to make it appealing, or they'll be managed by the dwindling number of older workers who still accept those terms until that generation retires and the organizational model collapses. Some companies are already adapting. They're creating flatter hierarchies with less distinction between leadership and individual contributors. They're eliminating the expectation that managers work constantly. They're making leadership about impact and support rather than hours logged and face time demonstrated. These organizations are attracting young talent. The ones clinging to traditional models are struggling to fill positions. The generational divide is stark. Workers over 55 experience significantly lower burnout than those under 30. This isn't because older workers are tougher. It's because they entered the workforce in a different era, with different expectations, and often have more seniority, which provides more control and flexibility. But the system that worked for them, or at least didn't destroy them, is destroying younger workers entering at the bottom with no power and maximum demands. Gen Z and millennials are 3 times more likely than workers over 55 to need time off due to deteriorating health caused by work stress. They report the highest rates of absence due to poor mental health. And crucially, they're the least likely to open up to managers about their stress levels. They don't trust the system to protect them, so they suffer privately until they quit. This is economically unsustainable for companies. High turnover is expensive. Constantly recruiting, hiring, and training new workers, because the young ones keep leaving costs far more than just restructuring work to be sustainable. But many organizations would rather pay those costs than question the fundamental model of how work is organized. There's a fascinating tension here. Gen Z demands purpose-driven work, but they also have clear boundaries about how much of themselves they'll give to any job. Previous generations often found identity and meaning through their careers. Gen Z finds meaning through their work, but their identity lives elsewhere. In relationships, hobbies, activism, creativity, community. Work is something they do, not who they are. This healthy separation drives older generations crazy because it feels like lack of commitment. But it's actually psychological health. The 40-hour work week was built on an assumption that work is central to identity and should be the organizing principle of adult life. Gen Z rejects that premise entirely. They want work that matters, but they don't want it to consume everything. They'll deliver excellent results during work hours, but when work time ends, they're done. No emails at night, no weekend work, no guilt about using vacation days, no apologizing for having boundaries. This isn't entitlement. This is a generation that watched the previous social contract fail and decided to write a new one. They're willing to walk away from opportunities that violate their terms. And because they have skills that are in demand, often they can. The data shows what happens when organizations listen to these demands. Companies that offer 4-day work weeks report 92% retention rates. Trials consistently show productivity increases, not decreases, when hours are reduced. Young workers aren't asking for permission to be lazy. They're demanding systems that recognize human limitations and design work around them. Gen Z understands something that took previous generations decades to learn. Your employer will replace you within weeks if you die, but your family will grieve forever. Your resume won't comfort you on your deathbed, but the relationships you built and experiences you had will define whether your life felt meaningful. Sacrificing everything for career advancement made sense in an era when careers provided security and loyalty was reciprocal. In an era where neither is true, it's just self-destruction with no payoff. The youngest workers aren't demanding less work. They're demanding better work. Work that respects their humanity. Work that provides meaning without demanding martyrdom. Work that fits into a life instead of consuming it. And they're refusing to participate in systems that can't meet those requirements. By 2040, these workers will be in their 30s and 40s, the prime career years when they should be the backbone of the economy. If the 40-hour week still exists by then, it won't include them. They'll have built alternative models, freelance portfolios, entrepreneurial ventures, part-time combinations that provide income without colonizing their entire existence. Companies that adapted will have access to their talent. Companies that didn't will be desperately competing for a shrinking pool of workers willing to accept outdated terms. This generation isn't killing the 40-hour work week out of spite or laziness. They're killing it because it's killing them. And they have the clarity to recognize that before it's too late. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. And it's reshaping the future of work, whether older generations approve or not. The question isn't whether Gen Z will accept the 40-hour week. They already answered, they won't. The question is whether the rest of us will adapt to that reality or cling to a model that's already dying while wondering why nobody wants to participate anymore. We've established the forces converging to dismantle the 40-hour work week. burnout epidemics costing trillions, AI automating predictable tasks, economic evidence showing shorter weeks increase revenue, remote work eliminating geographic constraints, and entire generations refusing to participate in unsustainable systems. Now let's explore how these forces might actually reshape work by 2040. The future isn't predetermined. Multiple pathways lead from where we are to where we're going. But what's remarkable is that despite different routes, they all arrive at the same destination: the end of the 40-hour week as the default structure for employment. Let's examine 4 plausible scenarios. Scenario A: the market-driven transformation. In this pathway, change happens through competitive pressure rather than regulation. It starts with innovative companies, the ones already running 4-day trials in 2025, discovering that shorter weeks give them an overwhelming advantage in recruiting and retaining talent. 92% of companies testing 4-day weeks kept them permanently not out of altruism, but because the business case became undeniable. As word spreads and younger workers make flexibility their top priority, 70% of job seekers now demand it. Companies face a choice: adapt or accept that the best candidates will go elsewhere. In tight labor markets where talent shortages remain the biggest barrier to organizational transformation, the companies offering 4-day weeks and outcome-based work capture the highest performers. Their productivity increases, their innovation accelerates, and their employee retention saves millions in turnover costs. Competitors notice. They see the talent flowing to more flexible organizations. They see the productivity numbers. They see the financial results. One by one, they adopt similar models to stay competitive. Within a decade, industries tip. Tech goes first, having already normalized remote work and outcome-based evaluation. Creative fields follow. Professional services adapt. Even traditionally rigid sectors like finance and law start experimenting when they realize they can't hire top talent anymore. By 2035, the 40-hour week exists primarily in industries with unavoidable physical presence requirements. But even there, innovation happens. Healthcare shifts to shorter, more focused shifts that reduce medical errors. Manufacturing adopts advanced automation that requires human oversight rather than constant operation. Retail experiments with skeleton crews supported by AI-powered systems. The transformation cascades. As more companies adopt shorter weeks, cultural expectations shift. Working 40 hours starts to signal inefficiency rather than dedication. Job postings advertising 4-day weeks become standard rather than special. By 2040, the question isn't, can we reduce hours? It's, why would we require more? This scenario requires no legislation, no grand coordinated effort, just market forces rewarding efficiency and penalizing rigidity. The companies that adapted earliest gained competitive advantage. The ones that waited struggled, and the invisible hand of the market pushed everyone toward the same conclusion. Humans produce better results in less time when given space to rest. Scenario B: the regulatory cascade. This pathway starts with government intervention rather than market evolution. Countries running successful 4-day week trials in 2025, places like Iceland, the UK, Portugal, and parts of Spain, begin codifying the practice into law. The evidence is overwhelming. 65% reduction in sick days, 57% drop in turnover, 1.4% revenue increase. When governments see outcomes this clear, they act. Iceland moves first. having already shifted thousands of workers to shorter weeks with documented success. They mandate 32-hour weeks as the new standard, with exceptions for essential services and emergency workers. Productivity doesn't drop. Quality of life measures soar. Other Nordic countries watch carefully. Within 3 years, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark follow. The EU conducts a comprehensive study comparing productivity, health outcomes, and economic performance in countries with shorter weeks versus traditional schedules. The data is decisive. By 2030, the European Parliament passes a directive establishing a maximum 35-hour workweek with strong incentives for companies to go lower. The ripple effects are immediate. Multinational corporations operating in Europe must adapt their European operations. But they discover what the trials already showed. People accomplish the same work in less time. The European divisions don't become less productive. In many cases, they outperform their American and Asian counterparts still working traditional hours. Pressure builds in other developed nations. New Zealand, always progressive on work-life policy, implements a 4-day week option. Canada begins national trials. Australia follows. In each case, the political calculation is simple. Workers want it, the evidence supports it, and countries that move first gain competitive advantage in attracting talent and building healthier, more productive workforces. The United States resists longer, viewing it as European socialism. But states act independently. California experiments first, then Oregon, Washington, New York, Massachusetts. By 2037, enough states have implemented shorter weeks that federal legislation becomes inevitable. The holdout states are hemorrhaging talent to places with better quality of life. By 2040, most developed nations have legal frameworks supporting or mandating work weeks under 40 hours. The implementation varies by country and culture, but the direction is universal. The regulatory cascade didn't eliminate the 40-hour week instantly. It created an accelerating momentum where each jurisdiction that changed made it easier and more necessary for the next to follow. Scenario C, the automation imperative. This scenario is driven less by worker demands or government policy and more by economic necessity created by advancing automation. The World Economic Forum projects 92 million jobs displaced by 2030, with 170 million created. But the jobs appearing require completely different skills than the jobs vanishing. As AI absorbs routine cognitive work and robotics handles physical labor, the nature of human employment fundamentally changes. By 2032, the most valuable human contributions are creativity, strategic thinking, complex problem-solving, and emotional intelligence. Neuroscience is clear. These capabilities cannot be sustained for 40 hours per week. Deep creative work requires intense focus that humans can only maintain for 4 to 6 hours daily before quality degrades. Companies discover this through trial and error. They try to extract 40 hours of high-level cognitive work from employees and get diminishing returns after the first 25 to 30 hours. The remaining time fills with busy work that produces little value. It becomes economically irrational to pay for 40 hours when you're only getting valuable output for 30. Simultaneously, automation makes shorter human hours viable. AI handles the routine tasks that used to fill entire jobs. What remains is supervisory work, strategic decisions, and creative contributions. A human working 25 focused hours with AI assistance produces more value than the same human grinding for 40 hours without support. The math becomes compelling around 2035. Companies can employ humans for 30 hours doing high-value work supported by AI, or they can employ them for 40 hours where the extra 10 produce minimal return. The economic choice is obvious. Shorter weeks aren't a worker benefit anymore. They're productivity optimization. This creates an interesting dynamic with universal basic income experiments, which show positive employment effects and mental health improvements. As automation reduces the total hours of human labor needed, but increases the skill level required for remaining work, some form of income support becomes economically necessary. People need time and financial security to constantly reskill as 39% of existing skill sets transform between 2025 and 2030. By 2040, work looks fundamentally different. Most people work 20 to 30 hours per week on cognitively demanding tasks. They're supported by AI for routine elements, supplemented by universal basic income or similar programs, and expected to continuously learn and adapt. The 40-hour week didn't just shrink. It transformed into something unrecognizable, short bursts of high-value human contribution rather than prolonged presence. Scenario D, the fractal future. This is the messiest, but perhaps most realistic scenario. No single pathway dominates, but all of them happen simultaneously in different industries, regions, and contexts, creating a fragmented but universally changed landscape. Tech and creative industries adopt 4-day weeks through market pressure by 2028. Nordic countries and progressive European nations legislate shorter weeks by 2030. Asia approaches it differently, with Japan and South Korea experimenting with radical work reform after recognizing unsustainable burnout rates. Developing nations take varied approaches based on their economic stages and cultural contexts. The gig economy expands massively, reaching beyond anything we see in 2025. 56% of digital nomads already hold traditional full-time jobs, with companies allowing remote work. By 2040, that number doubles. People create portfolio careers with multiple part-time engagements rather than single full-time jobs. A software developer might work 3 days for one company, 2 days consulting for another, and maintain a side business. Total hours worked might vary week to week, but the traditional 40-hour commitment to a single employer becomes increasingly rare. Manufacturing and physical labor industries automate extensively, but retain human workers in oversight and complex problem-solving roles. Their work weeks shrink, not to 4 days, but to varied schedules optimized around production needs and human capacity. A factory might operate continuously, but with workers on rotating 3-day or 4-day schedules, supported by AI systems that handle the routine monitoring. Healthcare remains complicated. The industry faces massive shortages predicted to worsen through 2040. But innovative scheduling emerges. Shorter, more focused shifts that reduce medical errors and burnout. The traditional model of doctors and nurses working 12-hour shifts gives way to 6 or 8-hour focused periods, with more workers splitting the coverage. This requires hiring more people, but reduced burnout and better retention make it economically viable, and patient outcomes improve. Education transforms significantly. Teachers increasingly use AI for administrative tasks, grading, and personalized student support, freeing them to focus on mentorship, inspiration, and complex instruction. The school week might remain 5 days for students, but teachers work 4 days in person with 1 day for planning, learning, and rest. Student outcomes improve because teachers are less exhausted and more creative. By 2040 in this scenario, there's no single model. The 40-hour week is effectively dead, but what replaced it varies enormously. Some people work 4 8-hour days. Some work 5 6-hour days. Some work 3 12-hour days. Some have portfolio careers with variable schedules. Some are fully freelance with complete autonomy. What's universal is the recognition that 40 hours of sustained cognitive output per week was always unrealistic, and organizations that cling to it are consistently outperformed by those that adapted. The convergence. Here's what's remarkable. Despite 4 different scenarios with different drivers and mechanisms, they all arrive at the same endpoint. Whether change happens through market competition, government regulation, automation necessity, or chaotic evolution, the 40-hour workweek doesn't survive to 2040 as the dominant model of employment. The forces are too strong and too aligned. The burnout epidemic costs too much. The productivity evidence from 4-day trials is too clear. AI removes too many routine tasks. Remote work eliminates too many constraints. Younger workers demand too forcefully. The economics favor efficiency too heavily. Different pathways might dominate in different contexts. Silicon Valley might change through market pressure, while France changes through legislation. Japan might be driven by demographic crisis, while India follows a unique developmental path. But the direction is universal, because the underlying reality is universal. Human cognitive capacity has limits. Work is becoming more cognitively demanding, and systems that acknowledge human limitations outperform systems that deny them. No single scenario will play out exactly as described. Reality will be messier, with elements from all of them combining in unpredictable ways. Unexpected events, technological breakthroughs, political disruptions, or cultural shifts we can't foresee will shape the exact path. But the destination is clear. The question isn't whether the 40-hour week survives to 2040. It's which combination of forces kills it, how quickly the transition happens, and whether we manage it thoughtfully or stumble through it chaotically. The math is settled. The evidence is in. The generational expectations have shifted. The technology enables it. The economics reward it. Multiple pathways lead forward, but none of them preserve the status quo. By 2040, we'll look back at the 40-hour work week the way we now look at 6-day weeks and child labor. As an artifact of a less informed era, necessary once perhaps, but obsolete once we understood better ways to organize human effort. That's not prediction. That's pattern recognition. The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, and the distribution is accelerating. So let's imagine you've arrived. It's 2040. The 40-hour work week is gone, replaced by something that looks nothing like what your parents or grandparents would recognize as employment. Most knowledge workers operate somewhere between 20 and 30 hours per week. Some industries settled on 4-day weeks. Others adopted flexible scheduling, where hours fluctuate based on project needs. Still others moved to outcome-based models, where time is irrelevant and deliverables are everything. The transformation happened. Now what? This is where the story gets philosophical, because changing how we work means changing how we live. And changing how we live forces us to confront questions we've been avoiding for a century. What is work for? What gives life meaning? Who are we when we're not defined by our jobs? The first question sounds simple, but isn't. What do you do with the extra time? In 2025, when companies tested 4-day weeks, workers used the additional day for rest, family time, personal projects, learning, and healthcare appointments they'd been postponing. The benefits showed up immediately in reduced stress, better sleep, improved mental health, and stronger relationships. People became fuller versions of themselves rather than exhausted shadows shuffling between work and collapse. But as the transformation spreads and becomes permanent, something more complex emerges. When everyone has more time, not just a privileged few, society reorganizes itself. The economy shifts. New industries appear. Cultural expectations change. By 2040, the education sector has transformed dramatically because people engage in continuous learning throughout their lives. 39% of existing skill sets became outdated between 2025 and 2030. That pace accelerated. Workers now expect to retrain multiple times across their careers, not because they're failing, but because the nature of valuable work keeps evolving. The extra hours from shorter work weeks feed directly into learning new capabilities, exploring different fields, and staying relevant in a rapidly changing economy. This creates what futurists call portfolio careers, where individuals maintain multiple income streams simultaneously. You might work 3 days per week as a data analyst for one company, spend 1 day consulting independently, and use your remaining time developing a side business or creative pursuit. Traditional full-time commitment to a single employer becomes just one option among many, and often not the most attractive or financially stable one. Payment models evolve alongside this shift. By 2040, traditional salaries have been replaced or supplemented by innovative payment structures moving beyond standard currency. Employees choose how they're paid based on their values, life plans, and work-life priorities. Cryptocurrencies and blockchain payroll enable daily or hourly payments. Dynamic micro-bonuses replace commissions, with AI alerting real-time rewards for safety performance, customer assistance, or creative problem-solving. Some workers trade portions of their pay for governance tokens, exchanging cash for actual influence over their department's or company's direction. This fundamental shift in compensation reflects a deeper truth. When work is measured by outcomes rather than hours, the economic relationship between employer and employee changes completely. You're not selling your time anymore. You're delivering value. And value can be compensated in ways that align with how you want to live rather than how corporations want to structure payroll. But this liberation creates new anxieties. For generations, identity was wrapped up in occupation. What do you do? Was the second question you asked after learning someone's name. And the answer told you their social status, education level, income bracket, and worth. When work stops consuming most of your waking hours and life energy, who are you? Some people thrive in this environment. Freed from the exhaustion of constant productivity demands, they explore creativity, deepen relationships, engage with community, pursue meaning through volunteering or activism, develop skills purely for joy rather than marketability, and discover parts of themselves that were dormant during decades of grinding work schedules. Others struggle. The structure of the 40-hour week provided external discipline and purpose. When that structure disappears, some people feel lost. They have time, but don't know how to fill it meaningfully. They have freedom, but lack direction. The paradox of abundance reveals that more time doesn't automatically equal better life if you haven't developed the capacity to use it well. This becomes a critical life skill in 2040, the ability to self-direct. to create structure without external imposition, to find meaning through internal motivation rather than external requirements. Education systems by this point emphasize these capacities, but adults who grew up in the old model often struggle to adapt. The transition from being told what to do for 40 hours per week to having genuine autonomy requires psychological muscles many people never developed. Mental health becomes simultaneously better and more complex. The burnout epidemic that plagued 2025, when 82% of workers were at risk, has largely resolved for those with access to shorter work weeks and reasonable economic security. But new challenges emerge. The existential question of what makes life meaningful when you're not defined by career success troubles people who spent decades pursuing promotions and titles only to discover that achieving them didn't deliver lasting fulfillment. Universal basic income or similar programs exist in many countries by 2040, providing baseline security that allows people to pursue work that matters rather than work that merely pays bills. This fundamentally changes the calculation around employment. You can afford to turn down meaningless jobs. You can take time to retrain. You can launch entrepreneurial ventures with less risk. You can negotiate for better conditions because refusing exploitative terms doesn't mean immediate destitution. But these programs also face ongoing political and social tension. Debates continue about who deserves support, whether unconditional income reduces motivation, and how to fund these systems sustainably as automation reduces traditional tax bases tied to employment. Different countries resolve these questions differently, creating a patchwork of approaches with varying success. The workplace itself has become almost unrecognizable. Physical offices still exist for some industries and some companies, but their purpose has shifted. They're no longer places where you go to prove you're working by being visible. They're collaborative hubs you visit when in-person interaction adds value. Smart office designs use AI to personalize environments, adjusting lighting, temperature, and even suggesting optimal work times and break periods based on individual productivity patterns and health metrics. Augmented reality and virtual reality are commonplace, allowing workers to collaborate across continents as if they're in the same room. Remote surgeries happen routinely. Virtual product testing eliminates the need for physical prototypes. Training occurs through lifelike simulations that provide experience without real-world risk. The boundary between physical and digital work has blurred to the point where location genuinely doesn't matter for most knowledge work. Geography has become truly optional. Digital nomadism, which numbered over 50 million people in 2025, has exploded. Entire industries have emerged to support location-independent workers. Co-living spaces, international health insurance designed for constant travelers, digital nomad visa programs in dozens of countries competing to attract talented remote workers, and communities built around shared mobility rather than permanent residence. This creates winners and losers geographically. Cities and countries that embraced remote workers built infrastructure to support them and created favorable regulatory environments attract talent and the economic activity it generates. Places that clung to outdated models requiring physical presence lost their knowledge workers to more flexible jurisdictions. The competition for talent happens between nations now, not just between companies. The fragmentation of work that researchers predicted in 2025 has fully manifested. Livelihoods come from scattered sources rather than single employers. The stability and duration of work varies dramatically between individuals and industries. Some people crave and achieve relatively traditional arrangements, just with fewer hours. Others live in a constant state of flux, assembling income from multiple streams that change month to month. Income inequality remains a defining challenge. Some scenarios that played out led to massive increases in inequality as highly skilled workers with AI augmentation captured enormous value while others were left behind. Other regions and industries managed more equitable transitions through aggressive retraining, strong social safety nets, and deliberate policies preventing winner-take-all dynamics. The global landscape is mixed, with pockets of relative equality amid broader trends toward concentration. What defines work itself has shifted fundamentally. Value is no longer created through mass production and standardized processes. It emerges from creativity, problem-solving, emotional intelligence, complex judgment, and strategic thinking. The capabilities that only humans provide and that AI supports but cannot replace. These capabilities cannot be sustained for 40 hours of focused output, which is why shorter work weeks became economically necessary rather than just morally preferable. The concept of retirement has evolved. People work longer overall, but in more flexible, project-based roles. The idea of stopping work entirely at 65 has given way to gradual transitions where people reduce hours, shift to less demanding roles, or move between periods of intense work and extended rest throughout their lives, rather than saving all the rest for the end. Management has transformed dramatically. The traditional hierarchy, where managers oversee workers and ensure they're productive through surveillance and control, is largely obsolete. In an outcome-based system, where people work remotely on flexible schedules, you can't manage presence. You can only manage results. This requires fundamentally different leadership skills, setting clear objectives, providing support and resources, facilitating collaboration, and trusting people to self-manage. The companies that succeeded in this transition empowered teams and individuals to make decisions autonomously. The ones that tried to maintain top-down control in a distributed, flexible environment collapsed under their own rigidity. The market ruthlessly sorted efficient from inefficient organizational models, and the efficient ones look nothing like corporations from 2025. Here's the question that haunts this future. Does more free time actually make people happier? The data from shorter workweek trials was clear. Yes, dramatically. Reduced stress, better sleep, improved relationships, enhanced mental health. All of it measurably better when people worked less. But those were early-stage experiments comparing before and after for the same individuals. When shorter weeks become universal and normal, do the benefits persist, or does hedonic adaptation erase them as people's expectations adjust? The answer appears to be, it depends on what people do with the time. Those who use it for activities that provide genuine fulfillment, meaningful relationships, personal growth, creative expression, community engagement, report sustained improvements in well-being. Those who fill the void with passive consumption, social media, and attempts to replicate the external validation that careers use to provide often feel emptier than before. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. The 40-hour work week was exhausting and destructive, but it also provided structure, purpose, and identity that many people needed. Removing it without helping people develop internal sources of meaning creates a different kind of crisis. Freedom without capability is just directionless anxiety. Education systems in 2040 have adapted to this reality. They emphasize not just technical skills, but also self-awareness, purpose exploration, relationship building, emotional regulation, creativity for its own sake, and the capacity to design a meaningful life. These were always important, but became critical once work stopped providing ready-made answers to the question of what makes life worthwhile. The paradox we're living with is this: we have more time, more freedom, more material abundance in many places than any previous generation. And yet, the fundamental human questions remain unchanged. What should I do with my limited years? What relationships matter? What contributions will I make? What will I create? How will I be remembered? The 40-hour work week answered these questions for us, however inadequately. It told you what to do with your time. Work. It told you what relationships mattered. Professional networks. It told you what contributions to make, whatever your job required. It told you how you'd be remembered through your career achievements. Now those answers are gone, and we're forced to develop our own. For some, this is liberation. For others, it's terrifying. For most, it's both. There's no single model for what living well in 2040 looks like. Some people work intensely for 3 months, then take a month completely off, cycling through periods of full engagement and total rest. Some maintain steady 25-hour weeks year-round, valuing consistency and balance. Some build portfolio careers with income from 5 different sources and responsibilities that shift weekly. Some pursue single passions with monastic focus. Some explore widely, changing directions constantly. What's universal is the recognition that this is a choice now, not a fixed path. And choice requires wisdom to navigate well. Here's what we've learned by 2040 that we're still figuring out how to fully integrate. Humans aren't machines. We never were. We can't produce at constant rates indefinitely. We need rest, relationships, meaning, and space to be something other than productive. The 40-hour work week denied this reality for a century, and we paid for that denial with burnout, broken families, lost potential, and lives spent exhausted. But simply working less doesn't automatically solve the human condition. It removes one form of suffering and makes room for more deliberate living. What fills that room is up to each person, and that's harder than it sounds. The future isn't about working less. It's about living more deliberately, making conscious choices about what matters, building lives that reflect values rather than just absorbing default cultural expectations, developing the inner resources to handle freedom well. Humanity has always adapted. We adapted from agricultural to industrial work, from industrial to information work. Now we're adapting to something that doesn't have a clear name yet: outcome work, meaningful work, human-scaled work. Whatever we call it, the pattern remains the same. The conditions change. We struggle with the transition. We eventually develop new norms and capabilities. And the next generation grows up thinking this was always normal. By 2060, people will look back at 2040 the way we look back at 1980. They'll see our struggles to adapt to shorter work weeks and wonder what took us so long. They'll grow up in a world where 25-hour weeks are standard, where continuous learning is expected, where portfolio careers are normal, where work is something you do rather than who you are. And they'll probably face their own transitions that we can't imagine yet. The quiet understanding that carries us forward is this: change is constant, but human adaptability is more constant still. We've always changed. We've always learned to live in new conditions. We've always created meaning from whatever materials our era provides. The 40-hour week served us for a time. Now it doesn't. We're building something different, and we'll be fine. Not because the future is predetermined or because progress is inevitable, but because humans are remarkably good at figuring things out when the old ways stop working. We just need to remember that and trust ourselves to adapt, even when the path forward isn't clear yet. The future of work isn't 40 hours in an office. It's 25 hours of meaningful contribution, supported by AI, delivering value from wherever makes sense, leaving time to be fully human. That's not utopia. It comes with its own challenges, anxieties, and inequalities. But it's better than what we left behind. And that's enough. We're not working less. We're living more. And slowly, carefully, sometimes painfully, we're learning what that means.